Hello! So today we visit Sanger in Illinois in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, and we have the Cessna 172 in front of us with the classic analog instruments installed. This Cessna comes with all the versions of Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. So to get to it, you just need to configure the Cessna in the free flight menu in the simulator, and then choose the classic version of the Cessna with the analog instruments. Okay, so we are in the walk-around view around the aeroplane. So we're going to go and prepare the aeroplane for flight and take it for a basic flight around the local area. Along the way, we will be following a checklist. I'm going to link it in the notes of the video. So it's a functional checklist. It doesn't include all of the checks that a real pilot would make, but it does include the things we can do in the simulator. So we're going to work through the checklist together, get the airplane ready for flight, and take it for a fly. We are deliberately not going to involve air traffic services in this beginner's guide, because we want to keep down the number of things we're dealing with. So for newcomers to the simulator, don't want to overload you with too much to think about or do. And for the same reason, we have gone into the weather icon at the top of the screen, and we have chosen custom weather and chosen few clouds. So in other words, there's hardly any wind to deal with. Okay, again, that's just to lessen the workload for newcomers, so we don't have to worry about crosswinds or turbulence or anything like that. Okay, so first things first, we're going to walk around the aeroplane. So we're going to hold the right mouse button down. So the mouse, you can wiggle around. Hold the right mouse button down while you're in walk around mode to drag the view around, and W, A, S and D on the keyboard will allow us to walk around the aeroplane. So we're going to remove the static port cover just by clicking on it. We're going to remove the pitot cover by clicking on it. Going to remove the engine cover by clicking on it, and then we're going to duck under the wing, come back round to the undercarriage and remove the chocks by clicking on them. You can interact in Flight Simulator with the control surfaces, and you will see the yokes react to that. If you go further back, we should be able to even grab the... Can we go and grab click? Can we get close enough to do this? Yeah, you can still see the yoke moving backwards and forwards. Look, if we get close enough to the elevator to move it. Not sure if we can wiggle the rudder. No. Okay, but we've done the essentials that we need to do to get the airplane ready. There are some nice little tricks built into the Cessnas that come with the simulator. You can open the oil and go and check the dipstick. Can't really interact with it, but it will show a level, and then you can click on the door to close it again. So when you're happy with your walk around, you can press Shift and C, and that will put you inside the cockpit. So as you will see, I have got head tracking. I've got a device called a Tobii eye tracker, which also tracks my head position, allows me to freely look around the airplane. I'm going to turn it off. So at this point, we're going to start walking through setting the airplane up. So I'm holding the right mouse button down and dragging to move my view around, but I can also use the built-in views within the sim. So if I hold Shift on the keyboard and press 1, I will see the instrument panel. 2 will see the radio stack. Shift and 3 will show me a little bit lower. Shift and 4 shows me the switch panel in front of the pilot. Shift and 5 shows me the trim wheel and the fuel selector down on the floor. Shift and 6 shows me a bit wider view. Shift and 7 is a view out over the front. Shift and 8 looks right. And Shift and 9 is back in the middle. So I guess they ran out of ideas by then when they configured the airplane. Shift and space will always return you back to the middle or the center of the cockpit, unless you have reprogrammed any of the key combinations in the simulator yourself. So I'm using the stock 2024 key combinations as I do this, and the checklist or the procedure I have written up also notes the stock key combinations. So if you've changed them, good luck. Okay, so where do we start then for pre-flight? We go Shift and 5. And we look down and we make sure that the fuel selector, for simplification purposes, is on both. So just roll the mouse wheel on the fuel selector. We're also going to make sure that the mixture is on rich. Now, I've got it bound to an axis on my controller, so I can move the mixture all the way into rich. Okay, so then I can also pull it back out to cutoff. So I'm just making sure that everything works. So let's try the throttle as well. So to begin with, I want the mixture on cutoff. So Shift and 4 shows us the pilot switch panel. We're going to go and turn the battery on, so it's the red switch on the right over here, and then turn the alternator on. Okay, so then we can press the beacon switch, or click on the beacon switch, which turns the beacon light on, which warns anybody around the airplane we're about to start the airplane up. So Shift and 5 will show us the quadrant in the middle, or the controls. We can put the throttle to 1/4 of an inch in and the mixture to rich, or all the way in. Then Shift and 4 takes us over here. We're going to go and put the fuel pump on for 3 or 4 seconds. So that this is important that the mixture is in when you do this. Not sure if this is actually simulated what it's doing in the real world. And then we pull the mixture back to lean. And we can take that fuel pump back off. By lean, I mean about 30% worth of the mixture. So then we can rotate the magnetos to start. So you roll the mouse wheel. And then you can push the mixture through to rich. Okay, and then we're going to increase the throttle gently to bring the RPM up to 1000 RPM. So you can see the gauge there as I gently push the throttle in, coming up to 1000 RPM. So Shift and 1 will show us the instruments. We're going to go and look over here. We've got the oil, there's the fuel. So there's the amount of fuel in each wing. The fuel is held in the wings in the 172. You've got the fuel flow and the exhaust gas temperature. You've got the oil temperature and pressure. So over the course of the next minute or two, that temperature will go up. And you've also got the vacuum. So many of the instruments are actually driven by gyros, which allows them to stabilize, things like the attitude indicator and the directional gyro. So yeah, they have gyros behind them. They require a vacuum pump to suck air through them to spin those gyros at high speed. So the engine generates a vacuum while it's running, and that's what allows that to happen. Okay. So once we've got the engine running, and there's going to be no surges through the electrical system, obviously, because the engine's ticking over in a nice stable way, we can press Shift and 4 to come down here, and we can go and turn on the avionics buses. Okay, so if we press Shift and space, having done that, it's worth pointing out you can click on the bottom of the stalks of the yokes to make them disappear out of the way. So having turned on the avionics, then the radio stack switches on. Okay, so Shift and 2 will bring us over towards the GPSs. So we wait for this is a GNS 530, this is a GNS 430, and they're pretty faithful, accurate representations of them. So we just wait for them to boot up, and then we can press enter twice on each, and that lets it go through. It's kind of simulating confirming our GPS position in the world. So it's looking for satellites, and then it will capture the satellites. So we can wait for that to happen, but while we're waiting we can go and configure comm radios or nav radios as we wish. So if we go and have a look at the wider cockpit here, this is nav 1, this is nav 2, and this is the ADF. So the ADF radio is over here. So the frequency to tune for nav 1 is on this unit, the GNS 530, and the frequency for nav 2 is on the GNS 430. So to change the comm radio, you can roll the outer wheel for the integers, the inner wheel for the decimals, and you can then switch the frequencies between the two. If you want to change the nav frequency, you push this knob in by clicking on the end of it, and that changes the focus, and then you can do the same for the nav radio. So you have a standby frequency and an active frequency. Okay, so you can then flick between the two. Same goes for COM2 and NAV2. Okay, the only other thing, we're not going to program a route in, that's a whole different subject that will take us ages, but the only thing to be aware of is the CDI mode. So this navigation instrument, if it's in GPS mode over here, will be showing our position relative to the GPS track. If you want to play with radio beacons, you need to switch it over to VLOC mode by pressing the CDI button, and that counts for nav2 and nav1. Okay. I'm not going to go into too much more than that. That's kind of the very basics of, just playing with the basic instruments over here. We're not going to put a route in. We're just going to be flying headings on the directional gyro today. Okay, so at the bottom of the instrument stack, we've got the transponder. We're going to put it on standby mode while we're getting ready on the ground. This is the autopilot. We're not going to be touching the autopilot today. That's going to be a subject for a whole nother video. Okay, so Shift and 1 shows us the instrument stack. You will see the altimeter is showing an altitude at the moment, and we can adjust it. And you'll see this if we zoom right in on it. When we adjust it, the number in this little window, this is called a Coleman window, this is showing barometric pressure. So in the same way that a weather instrument on the wall would show a barometric pressure, then you can tune this. So what it's doing is allowing the altitude to appear correct according to the local barometric pressure. So you can either call air traffic services to find that out, or to shortcut it in the simulator, you can just press the comma key. Another way to do it is if you know the altitude of your airport, just roll this round until the altitude reads correctly. Yeah? But comma will shortcut it for you. So just press comma on the keyboard. Okay, so we're almost ready to get going. So Shift and 4 brings us down here. We can go and put the taxi lights on. We can put the nav lights on. And we're going to go and check the brakes and everything. So I'm going to set us up slightly in the cockpit. I am going to go and put my head tracking on now so we can easily see what we're doing. We're going to come off the parking brake, and we're going to ease the throttle forwards, so we're looking out sideways as we do this, and try the toe brakes. So I've just hit my brakes and that's stopped the aeroplane. Okay, so the next thing you would typically do is an engine run-up test, but you wouldn't do it right next to where you are departing from. You would get to a nice remote part of the airfield, or just away from everybody, because you're going to make a lot of noise to do the run-up test. Okay, so we're just going to gently taxi out. There's no hurry with taxiing. Obviously you want enough power that you're not going to stall the engine. Looking around the whole time for anybody else around. I'm not anticipating seeing anybody, but you never know. So we'll come to a halt just over here on our run out to the runway, and then we'll turn the head tracking off so we can concentrate and show you this. So we're just going to do a basic engine run-up test. So what we do is look at the RPM, and we bring the power up until we get to about 1800 RPM. Okay. And then what we're going to do while it's running away at 1800 RPM is rotate the magnetos. So we're going to go to the left bank of magnetos, and you will see the RPM drop by about 100. And then we're going to go to the right bank of magnetos, and you can see it hasn't moved much from that. You want no more than 150 drop. If you see a significant drop, and to be honest, you won't in the simulator, because I don't think it simulates engine damage then, but in the real world that would be a problem with the engine. So if we go back to both, you should see it climb back up again. Okay, so you can then do an idle check and just bring the engine all the way back to idle, and it should drop to about 600 RPM, and there it goes, look, 6 to 650, and then back to 1000. Okay, let's go and roll out to the runway. So I'll just sit up slightly and come off the parking brake. So So when we get to the runway, we will turn on our strobe lights and our landing lights. We don't do it until we get to the runway because they're incredibly bright and they could affect people's vision if they look straight at them. Obviously, if you're using air traffic services, you would be getting clearance to enter the runway. You wouldn't just wander onto the runway as I just have, but we're here on our own. Okay, let's stop short here. So, strobes and landing lights and pitot heat. Okay. So, the last few things we're going to check is the directional gyro. Does it line up with the same direction as the magnetic compass? Looks like it does. Are the comm radios as we want them? Are the nav radios as we want them? Have we aligned the heading bug? You might want to go and align the heading bug on the directional gyro with the direction you're going to be departing. So we just spin it round to go the same direction we're pointing. Okay. Something that's worth pointing out that's not too obvious, but once you realise it's really useful, are these markers around the outside of the directional gyro. So when we take off, we'll be obviously travelling east. If we want to do a left 90-degree turn, we just keep going until obviously we get to the angle that's currently at the left red marker. So you just take a note before you start turning. Yeah, so we'll be turning to north and then we'll be turning to west. But obviously if we're travelling at a slightly different angle for a different airport somewhere, it's really useful to look on those red markers to say, okay, what's 90 from my current direction? Or, or what's 180 from my current direction to do a reciprocal course? So let's go put the controls back on. So, if you were using air traffic services as well, this is the point you'd go and turn the transponder to on, or altitude mode even. Okay. So, we are ready to go. So mixture, make sure your mixture is rich. So below 3,000 feet, mixture will need to be rich. Once you get above 3,000 feet, you start to lean the mixture out because the engine won't run very nicely. That'll be, again, another subject for another video, another day. On a long runway, you're not going to need flaps for takeoff in a Cessna. If you've got a short field, you might want to introduce flaps for takeoff, but just beware that flaps introduce drag. Okay, so before we get going, let's just sit on the parking brake for a moment. It's worth having a look around these instruments to see what we've got. Airspeed indicator. It reads how fast we're going via that tube on the wing. Yeah, the air pressure hitting that gives us our airspeed. Therefore, if we hadn't taken the cover off, we'd have no airspeed. Attitude indicator tells us which way up we are, so if we lose visibility, it's incredibly important. We've got altimeter. The short needle is thousands of feet, the long needle is hundreds of feet. So at the moment we are at about 800 feet above sea level. We mentioned earlier that's a nav instrument. We're not going to cover that today. That's another nav instrument below it, a slightly less clever one. We've got a turn coordinator here. Basically, if you are in level flight and the wing is lined up with the markers on the left or the right side, then you will be turning at a rate of 2 minutes for a 360-degree turn. So we've got a directional gyro here, tells us which direction we're flying. We've got a vertical speed indicator, so if we're climbing or descending, this is in hundreds of feet per minute. And that's it. So let's go and do a basic circuit around Sanger here in Illinois. So we're going to increase the power. We've come off the parking brake. So full power. I'm just going to reset my view slightly. So you're looking for about 50 knots for rotation. It's just coming through 50 now, so gently rotate. We're in the air. Remember, it's a long runway, so we didn't need flaps. I think it's about 75 to 80 knots is best climb rate in a Cessna. Depends on the model. So we look at holding our direction. We're going to climb out. Remember, we took off at about 800 feet above sea level, so 1800 feet will be 1000 feet above ground level. So we'll just climb out to 1000 feet in a straight line. You can generally hold quite easily about 1000 feet per minute on the vertical speed. I'm going to turn head tracking off so you can see this nice and easily. So we're coming up towards 1800 feet above sea level, which is 1000 feet above the ground. And then we're going to pull the throttle back to about 75% and trim the aeroplane. So I've got a couple of buttons on my joystick mapped to the trim elevator up and down, which allows me to very quickly, without looking away, trim the aeroplane. So I'm just feeding in a little bit of trim, and you're looking to get the aeroplane stable in terms of speed and vertical speed. Obviously, as you accelerate, the wings generate more lift. Anyway, so let's look at the turn coordinator then. We're going to turn left. So if we line the needle up, the wing up, sorry, on the marker, then we will turn at a rate of 360 degrees every 2 minutes. And remember, we started off facing east, so we want to be going west to go the reciprocal direction, or the opposite direction. Now look, we're climbing because we're slowly accelerating. So let's put in a little bit of forward trim. It's a bit like the old game of patting your head and rubbing your tummy at the same time, kind of the multitasking of flying an aeroplane. So we're coming round to west, which is the reciprocal. We've gained a little bit of height in the turn, but not too much. Okay, so we roll out, and we're now travelling the opposite direction than the runway. Just coming down to 1800 feet again. And if we look sideways, there's the airfield look. So remember, we climbed out quite a long way, didn't we, to get to 1000 feet before we made our turn. You can do a climbing turn and you can do a descending turn. They're kind of regarded as more advanced flying techniques, but just for the very, very basics, it's easier to minimize the things you're doing at any one time. You know, so get your climbing done, get the aeroplane balanced out, then get your turn done, then get your level flight done, maintaining a direction. So the general trick, once you've flown past the airfield with it off your wing, you'll notice a lot of people will do these left pattern circuits, as they call them, or left pattern. The reason people do the left turns is because the pilot is typically sitting on the left side and they've got better visibility. And certainly when you are joining the pattern at an airfield, you can see more of the other aeroplanes that might be in the pattern as you approach. So if you're coming in from the left, with the airfield to your left, then you can see the other aeroplanes in the pattern more easily. If it's the other side of the aeroplane, there's lots in your way that block your view. Okay, so while I was yapping there, look, we've started to drift. So you do need to monitor your instruments. And we've lost 100 feet as well, look. So aeroplanes do not go in a straight line of their own accord. You have to fly them. And anybody that thinks they can trim an aeroplane out to behave just as, like a robot, that they're going to be sadly disappointed. Because the more accurate the simulator, the more the aeroplane is going to move around on you. Okay, so we're looking out over our shoulder to see when the airfield is about, kind of just disappearing around the corner of the cockpit there, we can begin our turn to come back in. So we can do the same again. Holding the wingtip on the turn coordinator. We're going a little bit faster than we were just after takeoff, so you might want to pull the throttle back a bit, because obviously the faster you're going, the bigger the radius of the turn is going to be. but we can always correct that. So if we do come out a little bit wider than we needed to be, or we overshoot the center line during the turn, then we can always fix that. The great advantage of head tracking, look, is we can look out and see. So you're wanting to get the speed under control now and start extending flaps. Remember what I said though, while you're beginning to learn, minimize the number of things you try to do at once. So extend further downwind, so fly further away from the runway to give yourself more time coming in. So we're going to start extending the flaps. You'll hear lots of schools of thought about how to arrange your approach. The general idea though really is just come in at about the right angle. So this just takes practice to come in at the right kind of approach angle. Manage your airspeed. You're typically looking for about 700 or 800 feet per minute. Obviously I'm coming in a little bit steep here, but so more flaps. So as the speed comes off, you can introduce more flaps. And more flaps means you can fly more slowly. The end goal, you're aiming to get the aeroplane losing lift over the target markers on the runway. So we're going to bring the aeroplane over those target markers and then pull the throttle back. And keep lifting the nose. So I was a little bit early there, but I'll take it. So there's the basics. You just bring the speed back more and more, and obviously as you slow down the airplane loses lift and you roll in. So you can use wheel brakes once you slow down a little bit. You can lift the flaps up on the way down the runway. You don't take the lights off until you're off the runway because you want to make yourself as visible as possible. So then we turn off the runway, back onto the taxiway, and we'll just, to make things easy, we're going to turn off head tracking. We're going to remove the yoke and we're going to come down and turn off the strobe lights and the landing lights and taxi back in. So take the parking brake back off. So there you go, there's our basic first flight in a Cessna, just doing a basic circuit around Sanger here in Illinois, just to show you some basic things to do, to think about, to practice. Like I said, the easiest trick for newcomers is to not overload yourself. So do your climbing, then do your turn, then fly downwind past the airfield, just managing the direction you're going, the altitude you're at. Make your turn back and then start descending. You can obviously shorten that up and start combining those skills, so you can do a climbing turn and a descending turn. And we'll be covering some of that in future videos, but just for this first steps, I wanted to do a very, very basic circuit and giving you the things to think about. But yeah, the biggest trick I can give you there is don't overload. Just try to focus on one thing at a time. So I think somebody's parked in our spot, haven't they? They have. So we're going to be stopping right at the edge of the airfield here. So we'll put our parking brake on. So the easiest way to stop the engine in a basic GA plane like the Cessna is to actually pull the mixture. So you're starving the engine of fuel, which means that the lines in the engine don't end up with any fuel sat in them. If you just turn the magnetos off, the engine will stop firing, obviously, but you'll still have fuel in the system. So the best way is to actually use up the fuel by leaning it out and then turn off the magnetos afterwards. So then you can turn off the lights. So we've got the nav lights, the taxi lights, the beacon lights. Then we can turn off the avionics. Then we can turn off the master switches, and then we can go, actually there is no off setting in this aeroplane. You can't shut the fuel off. There's a plunger here, look, instead, which was in by default. But Yeah, it's actually a remarkably well simulated little Cessna, actually. So in future videos, we'll look at some of those more compound skills, so climbing turns, descending turns. We'll also have a look at basic navigation, using the nav instruments and using the compass, and flying around the place, flying between two different airfields. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that. So that was very first steps with the basic analog instrument Cessna 172 in Flight Simulator 2024. Hopefully you enjoyed that, and I'll see you again soon.